There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep. You wake up and do the right things. You work, you show up, you keep your word even when no one notices, and still nothing moves. The door you have been pushing against for years stays shut, and somewhere underneath the effort, a quiet suspicion starts to form. Maybe this is just how your life is going to be. Maybe you were left out of whatever arrangement made things easy for everyone else. That suspicion is not weakness. It is what happens to a person who has been trying to force a season that has not arrived yet. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying what happens to people right before their circumstances change, and what he found was almost the opposite of what we expect. He observed that the version of yourself you have been gripping onto, the identity built from other people's approval, from old fears, from a self-image assembled in childhood, usually starts to come apart before anything gets better. Not after, before. The falling apart is not the punishment, it is the preparation. Marcus Aurelius understood something adjacent to this, centuries earlier, when he wrote that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. He was not being poetic. He meant it as an operating principle. The obstacle is not a detour from your life. For a long stretch, it is your life, doing the only work it can do at that stage, clearing you out. So before we talk about the chapter where things start going right, we have to be honest about the chapter before it, because almost nobody arrives at ease by accident. They arrive there by first surviving the part where it felt like everything was falling apart, quietly, with no explanation. Here is the shift Jung kept circling back to. Most of us assume that success is a transaction. You put in effort, life gives you a result. And if the result doesn't come, you must not have earned it yet. So you push harder, you strategize, you try to out-argue reality. And reality, stubbornly, does not respond to arguments. What Jung called the ego is the part of you running that negotiation. It believes it can outplan fate if it just tries hard enough, stays disciplined enough, controls enough variables. The ego is not wrong to want order, but it is operating with limited information, because it can only see the surface of your life, your job title, your bank account, your 5-year plan. It cannot see what Jung called the self, the fuller architecture underneath, the part of you that already knows who you are becoming, long before your circumstances catch up. Epictetus drew almost the same line, though he used different language. He separated life into what is within our power and what is not, and he insisted that peace only becomes possible once we stop demanding control over the second category. Not because we stop caring, because we stop wasting our strength where it cannot do anything. This is why so many people experience their hardest year right before their best one. They are still negotiating with the part of life that was never going to negotiate back. Something changes when the negotiation ends, not because you get louder or work more hours, but because you stop performing for approval and start operating from something steadier. You stop needing the argument to have someone still in the room. And the strange thing people report, almost universally, once they reach this point, is that opportunity starts finding them instead of the other way around. The right conversation happens at the right time. Someone mentions the exact thing you needed to hear. A door that had been locked for years opens without you touching it. It is tempting to call this luck. Jung called it something closer to alignment, not magic, resonance. As if the outside world had simply been waiting for you to stop fighting yourself before it revealed what had been available the whole time. You will recognize the difference between an ordinary opportunity and this kind, because they do not feel the same in the body. An ordinary opportunity feels like a decision, pros, cons, a spreadsheet in your head. This kind feels like recognition. It arrives with a strange, quiet certainty, the kind that does not need convincing. You simply know, but there is a complication worth naming honestly, because most versions of this idea leave it out. Jung warned that when this kind of alignment arrives, people often run from it. Not because they don't want the good thing, because the good thing removes their last excuse. As long as your life is stuck, you can blame the timing, the economy, your upbringing, the people who failed you. The moment things start working, all of that has to be set down. You are no longer allowed to be the person life happened to. You have to become the person choosing what happens next. For some people, that is more frightening than staying stuck. Seneca wrote to a friend once that people do not lack strength, they lack the will to use it. And that most of what looks like circumstance is actually a habit of postponement dressed up as caution. We tell ourselves we are waiting for the right moment, the right resources, the right sign. Often we are waiting because becoming who we actually are is more disruptive than staying who we have been. Underneath most of the friction in a stuck life, Jung believed there is something specific running the show, not laziness, not bad luck, but what he called a complex, a cluster of old fear, old memory, and old belief, organized around a wound you probably didn't choose. A fear of being seen as not enough, a fear of being left, a fear of taking up space. You think you are making a clear decision about your career, your relationship, your next move, but underneath it, an old, much younger version of you is still trying to avoid the exact pain it once could not survive. This is why the same obstacle tends to repeat itself in different costumes across a life. Different job, same feeling of being overlooked. Different relationship, same fear of being abandoned. It is not coincidence. It is the complex, still steering, still unresolved. Jung's most quoted line captures this with more precision than almost anything written since. Until the unconscious is made conscious, it directs your life, and you call it fate. The work, then, is not to eliminate the wound. Jung didn't believe that was fully possible, and there is something honest in that. The work is to see it clearly enough that it stops making your decisions for you. You feel the old heat rise, the urge to over-explain yourself, to shrink, to control what cannot be controlled. And for the first time, there is enough distance between you and the feeling to choose differently. This is where the exhaustion starts to make sense. All the energy that used to go into hiding the wound, defending it, managing other people's reactions to it, is suddenly available for something else. People who reach this point often describe it the same way, not as gaining new strength, but as finally not fighting themselves. The talent was always there. The capacity was always there. What was missing was room. And this is where the emotional wound we opened with, the fear that you have been forgotten, that your effort has meant nothing, finally gets its answer. You were not forgotten. You were occupied. Most of your energy was spent managing an old story instead of building a new one. Once that story loosens its grip, what looks like a sudden turn in your circumstances is often just the natural result of a person who is, for the first time in years, not divided against themselves. There is a particular kind of authority that comes with this, and it has nothing to do with volume. Jung noticed that once someone stops needing external validation to know their own worth, they change the atmosphere of every room they walk into, not through force, but through the simple, rare fact of being whole. People sense it before they can explain it. He also warned against mistaking this for personal greatness, for believing the power now belongs to you rather than moving through you. The people who handle this well stay quiet about it. The ones who don't tend to lose it quickly. None of this arrives on a schedule you can plan around. It rarely responds to force, and it almost never responds to panic. What it responds to is a kind of patient attention, noticing what is actually happening instead of what you are afraid is happening, and trusting that the version of you still being assembled underneath the difficulty is not behind schedule. It never was. So if you are in the part of the story that feels like waiting, or worse, like falling apart, it may be worth asking a different question than the one you have been asking. Not what is wrong with me, but what is this actually preparing me for? The chapter where things go right rarely announces itself. It starts quietly, in the moment you stop negotiating with what was never going to change. and start becoming the person who no longer needs it to. If this way of looking at your own story was useful to you, the next video continues from here into what happens once that alignment holds, and how to keep from losing it once things finally start to move.